Somewhere in this country, on a folding table at an estate sale, there is a pocket knife with a $1 sticker on it. The man selling it has run the same checklist almost everyone runs. Does it open clean? Is the name one he has seen before? Does it look like it was cared for? By that test, the knife is junk. By the only test that actually matters, it is the most valuable object on the table, and he is about to hand it to a stranger for the price of a cup of coffee. This is the quiet truth about old pocket knives. The clean one, with the familiar stamp, is often a factory knife from the late 1990s, worth a few dollars used. The worn one, with the yellowed handle and a name that means nothing to the seller, is the one a dealer 3 states away has been watching auction listings for all year. The wrong person walks away with the right knife again and again, because the thing that makes it valuable is invisible. It is not stamped on the blade. It is not in the shine. It is in the history the steel cannot show on its surface. Age matters, but not the way people assume. Brand matters, but not the way a lifetime of hardware store shopping taught them. What separates a $4 folder from a $400 one has almost nothing to do with how it sits in the hand. It comes down to when it was made, where it was made, and a production window that closed quietly decades ago and left no sign on the outside of the steel that it ever existed. What follows are 15 American pocket knives that are quietly becoming priceless. Not because a collector's guide declared it, because the industrial system that produced them no longer exists, and the qualities that system built into them cannot be bought new at any price. The early ones on this list look plain and easy to dismiss. By the end, one of them will be worth more than most people's entire knife drawer. And the single most valuable knife of them all does not carry a famous name at all. The first 5 are the ones most likely to be thrown out, because they were built to disappear into a pocket, not to be admired. Number 15 is the Barlow. People assume a Barlow is the cheapest thing in any old drawer, and the modern ones earn that reputation. Soft stainless, loose at the pivot, dull before the work is done. But the Barlow is one of the oldest working knife patterns still made in America, carried by farmers and tradesmen for 2 centuries, and the old ones are a different tool. Long bolsters, 2 blades, high carbon steel that takes a working edge on a flat stone in under 2 minutes and keeps it through a full day of cutting. Number 14 is the Imperial Shell-Handled Jack out of Providence, Rhode Island. The stamped metal shell handle looks cheap, and that is exactly why it gets passed over. It was a mass-market knife from a factory era that is simply over, sold for pocket change in its day, and saved by almost no one. Number 13. The colonial Old Cutler Stockman came from that same Providence world. A sturdy 3-blade working knife built by the case, not the collector's display. Number 12 is the Utica Equal-End Jack, the Iroquois pattern, from Utica Cutlery in New York, a company that fed both the hardware counter and government contracts for decades. Number 11 is the Cattaraugus Equal-End Jack, from Cattaraugus Cutlery of Little Valley, New York. According to the reference work of Roy Ritchie and Ron Stewart, who cataloged these makers in detail, Cattaraugus was a serious force in American cutlery and a military supplier in the war years, the kind of name that meant something in 1930 and means nothing to most people now. 5 plain knives. 5 regional American factories in New York and Rhode Island and Pennsylvania that no longer exist. None of them was killed by a scandal. They were killed by arithmetic, by overseas labor, by automated lines that stamped out 1,000 units in the time a fitter once spent on one. and by a market that learned to want cheap over capable. The pattern repeats for a reason, and the next knife is where it starts to bite. Number 10 is the Congress knife. 4 blades on one handle, each one for a different job. A sheep's foot, a spay, a pen, a coping blade. Folding into stag or aged handles over visible brass liners. A farmer carried this because every blade had a purpose, one for twine, one for scraping, one for piercing leather, one for fine work. A modern multi-tool is a compromise. Blades that fold awkwardly, rust quickly, and flex at the joint under real pressure. The old Congress knife was a system. Matched carbon steel blades that bent and recovered, fitted by hand so they all closed into one frame without fighting each other. The mechanical action collectors call the walk and the talk, the way each blade snaps open and shut against the spring, depended on a fitter hand-aligning the back spring and the blade tang to a tolerance that a machine running 10,000 units an hour does not bother with anymore. 4 blades sounds like a lot. The next knife has 1 blade that mattered more than all 4 of these combined, because it went to war. Number 9 looks like an ordinary electrician's knife. It is not. It is serialized military gear, and most people have no idea what they are holding. This is the Camillus TL-29. Camillus Cutlery was founded in New York in 1876, and by the Second World War, it was a critical node in what the country called the arsenal of democracy. On the 17th of August, 1943, the company was awarded the Army-Navy Excellence in Production Award. The presentation noted that the steel from that single valley reached soldiers from Alaska to Australia. Between 1942 and 1945, Camillus turned out more than 15 million knives for the United States military, and it produced more of the famous Mark II fighting knife than any other maker. The TL-29, the designation stands for Tool Lineman Number 29 out of the Army Signal Corps, was the knife a soldier reached for when a wire had to be spliced in the mud. It carried a heavy spear-point master blade and a locking screwdriver and wire stripper blade, designed so the screwdriver would not fold shut on a soldier's hand under load. And here is the detail almost no one notices. During the war, brass was rationed to munitions, so the parts of the TL-29 that were normally brass, the liners, the pins, the blade lock, were made in steel instead, and only switched back to brass after the fighting stopped. The metal in the knife is a record of the war economy itself. Camillus kept making knives in that same New York Valley until 2007, when the doors finally closed. A clean wartime example, with its bone or hardwood handle intact, is not a junk drawer tool. It is a small piece of the American war effort that outlived the company that made it. The next knife wears a brand that is still sitting on store shelves today. The knife itself is dead. Number 8 is the Schrade Old Timer 340T, the middleman stockman. The brand is everywhere right now, and most people assume they are buying what their grandfather carried. They are not. The vintage American-made Old Timer was a 3-blade stockman, clip, sheep's foot, and pen, in genuine 1095 carbon steel, with brass liners, saw-cut Delrin handles, and a USA stamp on the ricasso. The imported versions that carry the name today do not share the steel, and they do not share the soul. Schrade's factory in Ellenville, New York, closed in 2004. More than 200 workers let go in a single day. The name was sold off to a marketing firm, and production moved overseas. The brand is now just a label, owned and licensed like any other. Sharpen a vintage 340T, and the edge holds through skinning, fence line, and grafting. Run a new import under the same work, and it asks for a stone inside 20 minutes. The name on the shelf and the knife in the old toolbox are simply not the same object, even though they share a logo and a model number. And a buyer who calls this pattern a trapper when it is a stockman has just told everyone in the room he has not learned to read it yet. 3 blades, not 2. That one detail separates the person who knows from the person who is guessing. Schrade stopped making that knife. The next company did not just stop a knife. The company itself is gone. And gone is a permanent condition. Number 7 is the Ulster Knife Company folder, and it comes wrapped in a story that is almost right. The popular version says Ulster shut down in 1941, which is supposedly why every Ulster knife is irreplaceable. The record says something more precise, and the precision is the point. Ulster was not closed in 1941. It was absorbed. Albert Baer bought the company that year and folded it into the Imperial Knife Associated Companies. And the name kept running under new ownership. The Ellenville plant turned out knives for 60 more years until it finally closed in 2004. That distinction is the entire game. The Ulster that matters is the one stamped before the absorption, when the company still set its own steel, its own grind, its own spring tension. And most people cannot tell that knife from a later one wearing the same name. No modern reproduction captures the specific tension of that spring, or a grind that still snaps shut cleanly after 80 years, because the tolerances were set by workers who understood the physics of a working tool in their hands. Bernard Levine, long regarded as the leading authority on knife history and identification, built his whole method on a single instruction: read the knife. The tang stamp, the handle material, the way the blade snaps shut, they will tell a person when it was made, if they know how to listen. A pre-absorption Ulster, found for a couple of dollars at an estate sale, can be worth a great deal more to the right buyer, and worth more still to the person who keeps it and actually uses it. The next company is not gone at all. It is alive and thriving, which somehow makes the trap worse. Everything in this list, when each of these factories opened and closed, who owned them, the patterns and the steels that defined them, is pulled together into a one-page dossier that can be kept. Point a phone at the code on screen, and it is yours. No charge, nothing to sign up for. Then stay, because the next knives on this list are the ones people throw away most often, and the ones worth the most when they do. Number 6 is the case-tested era knife. Case still exists, and it still makes a good knife. The case-tested carbon steel of roughly the 1920s through 1940 does not exist anymore, and that puts it in a different category of object entirely. The tested stamp on the blade, carrying 2 X's for the double tempering the steel went through, meant the knife had passed a flex test that most modern folders would fail outright. The 2 X's were not decoration. Workers marked a blade once after the first heat and again after the second, a stamp that said the steel had been pushed twice and held. Deep, hollow grind, aged bone in green, amber, or red, and a fit and finish from a time when a pocket knife was expected to outlive its owner. And here's the part most people inherit and never use. Case built a calendar into the tang. From 1970, 10 dots sat beneath the stamp, and 1 was ground away each passing year, counting down to a single dot by 1979. Through the 1980s, the same countdown ran alongside a lightning bolt-shaped letter S in the logo. A case from that era can be dated to the exact year it left the factory floor. That precision built one of the most liquid markets in all of knife collecting, with a collectors club tens of thousands of members deep. Yet most people inherit one from a great uncle, assume it is only sentimental, and traded away without ever reading the code sitting right there on the steel. The next two knives carry the names of companies that most people only know for one thing: guns. Number 5 is the Winchester cattle knife, and the reveal is the company that made it. Winchester is a name etched into American firearms history, the rifle that is shorthand for the frontier itself. For about 2 decades, from roughly 1920 to 1942, it also ran one of the finest cutlery operations in the country and built pocket knives that sold across the nation on the strength of that name. This is not a coincidence of branding. The discipline that heat treats a rifle receiver runs directly parallel to the discipline that tempers a folding blade, and Winchester built its knives to the same New Haven standard as its rifles. For a brief window, the company that armed America also reached into the American pocket. When the New Haven rifle plant itself shut its doors in 2006, and the Winchester name on firearms became a licensed brand rather than a working factory, the ammunition side carried on under Olin, while the rifles were built elsewhere under license. Those old knives quietly became relics of a company that, in its original form, no longer exists. A rifle maker's pocket knife is a real overlooked thing. The next one does not just come from a gun company. It wears a rifle cartridge on its handle, and it is the most collectible American folder ever made. Number 4 is the Remington bullet knife. Remington made knives. Most people only know the guns. And from 1920, at its Bridgeport, Connecticut plant, it built them by the millions. The first Remington catalog ran to more than 180 pages and listed hundreds of patterns, and by the mid-1920s, the company was producing more pocket knives than any other maker in the country. The bullet itself appeared in more than 24 variations across 2 decades. The Bullet series is named for the shield on the handle, shaped like a rifle cartridge. The first of them, the Jumbo Trapper, arrived in 1922, built to the same tolerances as Remington's sporting arms, in jigged bone or cocobolo with nickel-silver bolsters. The popular story says Remington stopped making knives in 1940 and never came back. The record is sharper than that. By 1933, DuPont held the majority of Remington. The cutlery division was losing money, and in 1940, the company sold its knife machinery and remaining parts to the Powell Blade Company. It was a balance sheet decision, not a heroic wartime sacrifice. The equipment was eventually scrapped. And the name did come back. In 1982, Remington reissued the Bullet as a licensed annual series, made under contract by other firms, and it became a collecting phenomenon in its own right. Which is the whole point, and the whole trap. The pre-war original, made in Bridgeport, is the one worth hundreds. The 80s reissue, however handsome, is a modern knife wearing an old idea. And according to the reference work of Roy Ritchie and Ron Stewart, telling the original from the reproduction is exactly where most people get it wrong. A true pre-war bullet can still turn up in a mixed auction lot for $8, the cartridge shield still clear on the handle, while the person selling it has no idea it is the most collectible American folder of them all. The next knife is one almost everyone owns. Almost nobody knows which version of it is actually worth keeping. Number 3 is the vintage Buck 110 Folding Hunter. They are everywhere, which is exactly why the version that matters hides in plain sight. The line everyone repeats is pre-1985. The steel record says 1981. Before 1981, the 110 used 440C steel. After that, the company moved to 425M, and later to 420HC. The early knives have solid brass bolsters that do not wear through the way plated hardware does over decades of carry. And the real story was never some secret grind angle. It was the heat treatment that set Buck apart, a process the family had been refining since Hoyt Buck first hardened a blade in 1902. the thing that let a lock-back folder suddenly do the work of a fixed blade. The 110 arrived in 1964 and has barely changed on the outside in 60 years. And that sameness is the trap. Two knives can sit side by side on a table, identical to the eye, and be separated by decades and by a complete change of steel. Most people own one and have never once looked at the ricasso, so they do not actually know which knife they have. The date stamps are right there on the tang. Read them before trading a 440C original for the price of the version that replaced it. The next knife is the most boring object on this entire list. It is also the hardest one in the world to replace. Number 2 is the pre-war carbon steel jackknife in 1095 or 01 steel. A single blade, a clip or sheep's foot pattern, bone or wood scales worn smooth by decades of handling, a dark carbon patina across the steel, a tight pivot, a strong backspring. It is not exciting. There is no famous shield, no war story, no cartridge on the handle. That is precisely why it is this high on the list, because its value is the purest version of the argument this whole list is making. Modern stainless folders resist rust, but their edge retention is mediocre, and field sharpening on a basic stone is genuinely difficult with most modern steels. A pre-war carbon jackknife sharpens fast on any flat stone, holds its edge under hard use, and the patina itself tells a person when the steel needs attention. There are no moving parts that cannot be understood and repaired by hand. When the power is out, when there is rope to cut and food to prepare and kindling to make, the modern folder rolls its edge in 20 minutes, and the carbon jackknife is still working at hour 3. These turn up in barn cleanouts and inherited toolboxes, sold for $2 as junk. This is the knife a grandfather carried, not because it was romantic, but because it worked, and never once gave him a reason to replace it. And the single most valuable knife on this list has no famous name on it at all, because the value, in the end, was never about the name. Number 1 is the uncatalogued regional shop knife. No collector book lists it. No database tracks it. There is no famous stamp to look up, and no price guide that will ever tell its owner what it is. From roughly 1920 to 1960, small cutlery shops across America turned out limited runs of working knives, sold locally and never advertised nationally. The steel, the pattern, the handle material, and the grind were all decided by one person in one shop. Hand-cut bolsters, fitted bone or stag, no two identical. A file-worked spine for grip, hand-set pivot pins, and a grind that came from someone who had sharpened thousands of blades and knew exactly what a working edge needed to do. These makers are invisible to the price guides precisely because they never chased a national market. They made knives for the men in their own county, and when the founder put down his tools, the knowledge went with him. A person finds one with no recognizable tang stamp, a blade ground unlike anything in any catalog, and the marks of being resharpened 20 times over 50 years. And it still holds an edge. That is not an accident. The most valuable knife on this list is the one with no name, because what it is worth was never the brand. It was the closed window, the dead system, the single human hand, now gone, that set an edge no machine was ever asked to match. Go back to that dollar knife on the folding table. The seller ran his checklist and saw junk. What was actually sitting there was a surviving piece of an American industrial world. The steels, the standards, the hand-fitted geometry, the regional makers and the gun companies and the wartime arsenals, that has closed quietly and left no sign on the outside that it ever existed. The brands that survived mostly survived as names, licensed and printed on steel made somewhere else. The factories, the fitters, and the formulas did not. I have held one of these and run my thumb along an edge that somebody set by hand longer ago than I have been alive, and understood for the first time that "Made in America" was once a standard a person signed their name to. These knives are not valuable because they are old. They are valuable because the systems that made them are gone, and the working qualities they carry cannot be purchased new at any price. If that still means something, you already belong here. Subscribe and stand with the people who refuse to let these names be forgotten. Most people will keep buying disposable folders. A few will go and check the drawer. The right knife keeps ending up in the wrong hands, and it stays there until someone finally learns how to read it.